early 2000s truly had the worst album covers. I love this album a lot, but holy hell, what is this? I'm getting flashbacks to my high school DeviantArt account where I posted black and white photos with captions like, I am a fragment of despair. And Jesus God, I'm not sure which of the two fonts here is worse. It might be the death metal font for the band name. It looks like it's for the sign of a haunted house. Welcome to Daily Metal, where every day a different metal album gets dissected for your sadistic listening pleasure. I'm the heavy metal lawyer, Emma, and in this show I'll talk about why the music in these albums is so good and where they fall in the history of music's most wretched genre. Take yourself back to 2005. George W. Bush just got reelected despite being a mass murdering racist. Congress was busy working on making sure your private student loans couldn't be discharged in bankruptcy. All your friends listened to Black Label Society and Avenged Sevenfold. It truly felt like society was in free fall. And few albums captured the mood like the one that came out today on June 27th in 2005, World Declension by Sentinex. Sentinex would fall apart itself the very next year, but before they did, they gave us all their disgust and bitterness in the best death metal album of the year. Well, unless you count Alaska by Between the Bird and Me, which I wouldn't. They're more like death jazz, technical death prog. Anyways, Swedish band Sentinex was born in 1990, just when bands like Entombed were beginning to give Sweden a lot of credit in the world of death metal. But Sentinex went in a very much different direction than Entombed's rock and roll influenced death metal. Sure, even as late as 2000 with their album Hell Brigade, Sentinex sounded like a pretty standard Swedish death metal band with some black metal influences. But with World Declension, Sentinex's sound was much more influenced by grindcore and grindcore adjacent death metal bands. Which isn't too surprising because every Swedish death metal band claimed total fealty to the old Swedish death metal sound, even bands like Opeth. But also apparently Sentinex members were in a bunch of punk bands on the side, so it isn't too surprising that they picked up a more energetic sound with crisper and more distinct melodies and went from singing about the Emperor of Death to singing about deconstruction macabre, which I just assume is about Michel Foucault becoming a zombie. Also, I wasn't able to find any of these punk bands that Sentinex members were in. One was apparently named Without Griff, but I couldn't find them anywhere on the internet. If anyone knows where I could find that music, I'm super curious what it sounds like. Anyways, back to World Declension. It's a great album for the band's development into a more interesting and heterodox sound in the Swedish death metal world. And it also marks an important point of development in the history of grindcore. Starting with Napalm Death and later with Carcass and Terrorizer, the more death metal and technical side of grindcore had established the foundations of its sound and constituent elements, the wretched vocals, the gratuitous blast beats, the thrashy riffs, but it lacked both the technology and technical capabilities to push the genre to the next level. Don't get me wrong, Scum and World Downfall and Necrotism Descanting the Insalubrious are all great albums, but there were certainly elements that were keeping it from being as ferocious as it could be. Sentinex brought the famous Swedish buzzsaw guitars and a great back and forth between the two styles of screaming, with one being higher pitched and scratchy and the other being more guttural and growling, as well as some gang vocals like on the song Synthetic Sin Zero, which again seems like something they probably picked up from those punk bands they were playing in. And in a beautiful example of genres constantly recreating themselves, the genre's baby daddy, Napalm Death, began using a very similar back and forth high-pitched, low-pitched screaming in their album Smear Campaign. Am I saying that Sentinex popularized this vocal style in grindcore? I honestly have no idea. But this is definitely the time it started to show up a lot in grindcore. So I'm more pointing to Sentinex as an example of a trend rather than crediting them as the first to do it. But they're definitely one of the best, and a great album to give the skeptic in your life who says that screaming in music doesn't require any talent or all sounds the same. I don't know, maybe I'm just letting nostalgia get to me since this was one of the first death metal albums I ever listened to when I was about 15 years old. Along with Converge and Leftover Crack, it helped convince me that screaming in music could be a creative and interesting source of instrumentation rather than just a gimmick to deal with the fact that no one in the band was able to sing. So, what's your favorite era of grindcore music? Do you think the more death metal influenced stuff like Sentinex should be categorized as death metal and grindcore should be left to the most extreme stuff like Sore Throat? Let me know what you think in the comments, and if you like this video, please subscribe so you can find out what the metal album of the day is, why it is so brutal, and where it fits in the history of the genre.